A husband and his pregnant wife set out on a crisp autumn morning in 2005 to explore the majestic trails of Yosemite National Park, a final adventure before becoming parents. The rental car was found 3 days later, abandoned at a remote trailhead, but Patrick and Vanessa Walsh had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only their carefully packed camping gear and dwindling hopes. For 7 years, their families lived in the purgatory of not knowing, the case growing colder with each passing season. Then in 2012, a wildlife photographer scaling a remote cliff face discovered a weathered camera wedged in a narrow crevice, its film somehow preserved. The photos inside, capturing the couple's final hours, revealed something so inexplicable that it transformed a tragic hiking accident into one of America's most haunting wilderness mysteries. The morning of October 8, 2005, dawned with deceptive perfection over Yosemite National Park. A thin layer of frost glittered on the meadow grasses, dissolving into jeweled droplets as the sun crested over Half Dome. The air held that distinct autumn crispness, clean, thin, and carrying the subtle warning of winter's approach. At precisely 7:42 a.m., a silver Honda CR-V turned off the main park road and pulled into the nearly empty parking area near Cathedral Lake's trailhead. The vehicle came to a stop in a space far from the information board, its tires crunching on loose gravel that had accumulated along the lot's perimeter. From the passenger side emerged Vanessa Walsh, 28, her movements slow and deliberate. She wore a forest green down vest over a thick blue flannel shirt, practical clothes that accommodated her 5-month pregnancy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sensible braid, and she adjusted a worn leather camera strap around her neck with the practiced motion of someone who had done so thousands of times. The camera, a vintage Nikon 35mm that had belonged to her father, was her constant companion, a family heirloom that documented her life's adventures. Patrick Walsh, 31, exited the driver's side with athletic ease. Tall and lean with a neatly trimmed beard, he was dressed in layers, a thermal shirt beneath a red and black buffalo plaid flannel, with a lightweight Gore-Tex jacket tied around his waist. Practical, prepared. The temperature would rise 20 degrees by midday, and Patrick was a meticulous planner, especially now with Vanessa carrying their first child. "How's little hiker doing this morning?" Patrick asked, reaching over to place his palm gently on Vanessa's rounded stomach. "Active," she replied with a tired smile. "Been kicking since dawn. I think he's excited for his first Yosemite adventure." Patrick corrected with a grin, continuing their long-running joke about the baby's gender, which they'd chosen not to learn. The couple moved to the rear of the vehicle, where Patrick began unpacking their day packs with efficient precision. 2 hydration reservoirs, high-protein trail mix in reusable containers, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, a small first aid kit, extra socks, a topographical map already marked with their intended route, a compass, 2 headlamps, a small emergency blanket, a whistle, matches, and a waterproof case. This methodical preparation wasn't unusual for Patrick. As an experienced wilderness guide who had led expeditions through the Sierras for 7 years, he approached even a simple day hike with professional thoroughness. He handed Vanessa the lighter of the 2 packs, taking the heavier one for himself. "Remember," he said, helping her adjust her straps, "we're just doing the first 4 miles today. Easy pace. If you feel tired at any point, we turn around. No exceptions." Vanessa rolled her eyes playfully, but nodded. "Yes, Captain Safety. Though I think you're forgetting who hiked the entire John Muir Trail before we met." "That was pre-pregnancy," Patrick replied, his tone light but his eyes serious. "Different rules apply now." What neither of them could have known as they set off toward the trailhead, their breath visible in the cool morning air, was that someone was watching them. A hiker preparing to leave noticed the couple and later remembered thinking how prepared they looked, how at ease in the environment. It was the last confirmed sighting of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh. 3 days later, their silver Honda CR-V would still be sitting in that same parking spot, undisturbed except for a thin layer of dust and pine needles that had settled on its roof and hood. But Patrick and Vanessa would be gone, vanished into the vast wilderness of Yosemite, leaving behind only questions that would haunt their families, the investigators, and the park itself for years to come. On the 4th day, he called a closed meeting, with only the highest-ranking officials involved in the case. What was discussed in that meeting has never been fully disclosed, but it resulted in an official report with a conclusion that satisfied no one. After thorough investigation, it appears Patrick and Vanessa Walsh entered a previously unmapped cave system, where they likely became disoriented and subsequently perished due to exposure and slash or lack of supplies. Despite extensive search efforts, the remains have not been recovered. The families were provided with a heavily redacted version of the report, along with Patrick's Swiss Army knife and the ultrasound image. They were told that while their children's bodies had not been found, the evidence suggested they had not survived. Eleanor Walsh never accepted this conclusion. "They're hiding something," she insisted to anyone who would listen. That report has more black lines than text. What the official report omitted were the contents of Vanessa's journal, which told a story so extraordinary that tourists had deemed it too sensitive for public release. The journal described how the couple had discovered the cave and the ancient petroglyph panel. Vanessa wrote of strange experiences within the cave, unusual light phenomena, unexplained sounds, and most disturbingly, what she described as moments of displacement, where time seemed to flow differently. The final entry, dated October 12, 2005, 4 days after they entered the cave, contained a passage that tourists found impossible to reconcile with any conventional explanation. "The doorway is opening again tonight. Patrick believes this is our last chance. The baby kicked this morning. I choose to believe it's a sign of approval. If we're wrong, may whoever finds this forgive us. If we're right, we will have stepped through into something extraordinary. Either way, we'll go together, the three of us, into the unknown." The camera, deliberately wedged in the rock face exactly 7 years later, on the anniversary of their disappearance, raised questions that no one in official capacity was willing to address publicly. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the findings from the technical analysis of the photographs. When the final image, the one showing the petroglyph panel, was digitally enhanced and examined under specialized lighting, something became visible that hadn't been apparent in the original development. Reflected in the flash from Vanessa's camera, barely perceptible even under enhancement, was what appeared to be a doorway of light opening in the center of the stone panel, exactly where the team had found the crawl space leading to the circular chamber. And at the threshold of that light stood two silhouettes, hand in hand, facing away from the camera, as if preparing to step through. To this day, the case of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh remains officially classified as missing, presumed deceased. Their families continue to press for full disclosure of the investigation's findings, and online forums buzz with theories ranging from the practical to the fantastical. Some believe the couple simply got lost in an extensive cave system that has yet to be fully explored. Others point to the possibility of foul play, perhaps by unknown third parties who later planted the camera as a red herring. Then there are those who look to Vanessa's journal and the enhanced photograph and wonder if something truly extraordinary happened in that hidden chamber, something beyond conventional explanation. The wilderness of Yosemite keeps its secrets well, and perhaps some mysteries are not meant to be solved, but simply to remind us that between the known and the unknown, there exists a borderland where certainty dissolves and wonder takes its place. For those who venture into the wild places of the world, let this be both a warning and an invitation. Sometimes when we step off the marked trail, we find not just adventure, but doorways to the unexpected. And once those doorways close behind us, there may be no coming back. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe to Last Seen Stories for more unexplained disappearances. Leave a comment below with your theory about what happened to Patrick and Vanessa. Was it a tragic accident or something beyond explanation? And stay tuned for our next episode, where we investigate the case of twin brothers who vanished during a camping trip in the Boundary Waters, only to have one return 3 years later, with no memory of where he'd been. The first person to notice something was wrong wasn't family or friends, but a park ranger named Michael Calloway. At 43, Calloway was a 15-year veteran of the National Park Service, with the last 8 spent patrolling the eastern quadrant of Yosemite. On the morning of October 11, 2005, he was conducting routine checks of the overnight parking areas, looking for vehicles that had remained beyond their permitted time. The silver Honda caught his attention immediately, not because it was out of place, but because it was meticulously parked, aligned perfectly between the lines, yet had clearly not been moved for days. The thin layer of debris on its surface told that story plainly to Calloway's experienced eye. He approached the vehicle, cupping his hands against the window to peer inside. The interior was immaculate. No trash, no scattered maps or discarded water bottles. The only items visible were a small guidebook to Yosemite's bird species on the back seat and a blue sweatshirt folded neatly on the passenger floorboard. Calloway checked the parking permit displayed on the dashboard. It was a 7-day pass purchased on October 7th. The vehicle wasn't technically in violation yet, but something felt off to the ranger. In his experience, hikers who parked this carefully also tended to check in and out with predictable regularity. He ran the plates and received the information that the Honda was a rental, checked out to Patrick Walsh from a company in San Francisco 5 days earlier. Following protocol, Calloway called the rental company to inquire if the vehicle was expected back. The answer was immediate and concerning. The car should have been returned the previous day. The ranger's unease deepened. He radioed back to headquarters and requested any information about hikers named Walsh. There were no camping permits issued to anyone with that name, no records of them checking into any of the park's accommodations. Within the hour, Calloway had located the registry at the Cathedral Lakes trailhead, where hikers were encouraged but not required to sign in. There, in neat handwriting dated October 8th, was an entry. Patrick and Vanessa Walsh, day hike to Lower Cathedral Lake. Expect return by 4 p.m. It was now nearly 72 hours past that expected return time. "We need to initiate a search," Calloway said into his radio, his voice clipped and professional, despite the knot forming in his stomach. "I've got 2 overdue hikers, potentially in distress." By noon, the machinery of a search and rescue operation was grinding into motion. Calls were placed to the emergency contacts listed on the rental agreement. Patrick's mother, Eleanor Walsh, answered on the second ring. The conversation would later haunt her dreams for years. "Mrs. Walsh, this is Ranger Supervisor Davis from Yosemite National Park. We're trying to locate your son Patrick and his wife Vanessa. Have you heard from them in the past 3 days?" The silence on the line stretched for several seconds before Eleanor's voice, suddenly small and fragile, replied, "No. They were supposed to call Sunday night when they got back to San Francisco. I've been trying their phones, but I thought maybe they extended their trip." Within an hour, the scope of concern had widened dramatically. Calls to Vanessa's parents confirmed they hadn't heard from the couple either. Attempts to ping their cell phones showed no activity since the morning they entered the park. Their hotel in San Francisco reported they had never returned to check out, their luggage still waiting in storage. The search began where all searches do, at the point last seen. Teams of rangers and volunteers spread out along the Cathedral Lakes Trail, moving methodically through the terrain, calling the couple's names into the vast wilderness. The weather that had been so perfect when Patrick and Vanessa set out had deteriorated. Low clouds hung over the mountains, and intermittent drizzle reduced visibility and complicated tracking. As daylight waned on that first search day, there was a brief surge of hope. A volunteer found what appeared to be fresh boot prints veering off the main trail about 2 miles in, heading toward a scenic overlook. The prints matched the tread pattern family members confirmed would be consistent with Patrick's hiking boots. The discovery shifted the search focus. Teams were redirected to the area, and as darkness fell, powerful floodlights cut through the gloom as searchers called into the night. But by morning, the promising lead had evaporated. The boot prints led to the overlook, but then seemed to simply stop at a rock outcropping that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Beyond that point, the rocky terrain held no traces. Back at the Incident Command Post established near the Visitor Center, Yosemite Search and Rescue Coordinator Laurel Jenkins stared at the large topographical map now dominating the wall. With 20 years of experience finding lost hikers, climbers, and campers, Jenkins had developed an almost uncanny ability to predict where people in distress might go. "They've got to be somewhere in this quadrant," she said, circling an area with her finger. "If they continued past the overlook, there are 3 likely routes they could have taken." But what troubled Jenkins wasn't where the Walshes might have gone. It was the absence of expected evidence. No discarded items, no signs of hasty camp. No indications of injury or distress. An experienced hiker like Patrick would have known to leave markers if they became lost. The fact that they hadn't found a single one was deeply concerning. As the second day of searching dawned, the operation expanded dramatically. 2 helicopters with thermal imaging equipment were brought in to scan the vast territory. 6 dog teams specialized in human scent tracking arrived from across California. The number of ground searchers swelled to over 50. The media arrived too. First, local outlets from Fresno and Sacramento. Then national news as the story of the missing pregnant woman and her wilderness guide husband captured public attention. The narrative was irresistible. A couple expecting their first child vanished in one of America's most beautiful and dangerous landscapes. Eleanor Walsh and Vanessa's parents, Michael and Catherine Delaney, arrived at the park on the evening of the second day. They were immediately escorted to the command center, where they provided crucial details that might aid the search. Photos of the couple, medical information, Vanessa's pregnancy was healthy, but she had a mild allergy to bee stings and carried an EpiPen. Patrick had no health issues but had suffered a minor knee sprain the previous year. Most importantly, they were able to describe with precision the gear the couple would have been carrying. Patrick always has his red Swiss Army knife, Eleanor said. Her voice steadied her now that she was doing something useful. It was a gift from his father before he passed. He carries it everywhere. And Vanessa never goes anywhere without her camera, Michael Delaney added. It's a Nikon 35mm film camera, black with a worn leather strap. It was mine originally. I gave it to her when she went to college. These details were added to the search parameters. Items to look for. Objects that might have been dropped or discarded. By the end of the third day, the search had covered over 20 square miles of challenging terrain. The dogs had tracked scents along several different routes, leading away from the overlook. But all eventually went cold, often at streams or rocky areas, where scent was difficult to maintain. On the fourth day, a storm system moved in, bringing steady rain and temperatures that dipped close to freezing at night. The conditions weren't just miserable for the searchers. They were potentially fatal for anyone stranded in the wilderness without proper shelter. It was on this day that Jenkins made a difficult decision. She expanded the search parameters to include not just trails and likely routes, but also the bases of cliffs and steep ravines. She was now actively looking for bodies as well as survivors. The rain continued for 2 more days, turning the search into a grueling ordeal. Mudslides closed access to certain areas. Visibility was reduced to mere feet in some locations. The helicopter operations were grounded. On the 7th day, with no new leads and deteriorating conditions, the decision no one wanted to make loomed over the command center. The active full-scale search could not continue indefinitely. Resources were stretched thin, and the likelihood of finding the couple alive after a week in these conditions had diminished to near zero. Jenkins delivered the news to the families personally, her face drawn with exhaustion and regret. "We're not giving up," she assured them, "but we need to scale back the operation. We'll continue with specialized teams in high-probability areas, and all park personnel will remain on alert." Eleanor Walsh, who had not cried once since arriving at the park, finally broke down. "They're still out there," she sobbed. "My son wouldn't give up, and neither can we." "We won't stop looking," Jenkins promised. "But we need to be realistic about our approach now." As the massive search operation wound down, a new phase began, the investigative phase. The question was no longer just where Patrick and Vanessa were, but what had happened to them. Accident? Foul play? Voluntary disappearance? Every possibility had to be considered. Park investigators worked with the FBI to develop a comprehensive timeline of the couple's movements. Their flight from Portland to San Francisco. Their 2 nights at a hotel near Fisherman's Wharf. The rental car pickup. Gas station security footage showing them stopping for supplies near Merced. Then their entry into Yosemite, logged at the West Entrance Station at 5:17 p.m. on October 7th. After that, the digital trail went cold. Their cell phones showed no activity. Their credit cards remained unused. The only evidence of their presence in the park was their abandoned Honda and the single register entry at the trailhead. Investigators interviewed everyone who might have seen them: store clerks at the Yosemite Village Market, staff at the Ahwahnee Hotel where they'd made dinner reservations for October 9th, which they never kept, other hikers who had signed the Cathedral Lakes register on the same day. One hiker remembered seeing them in the parking lot, noting how prepared they seemed. Another thought he might have passed them on the trail about a mile in but couldn't be certain. The couple had left virtually no impression on anyone they encountered. Just another pair of visitors in a park that saw 4 million people annually. As weeks turned to months, the case of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh transformed from a search and rescue operation to a cold case. The seasonal snows came, blanketing the high country in white, rendering continued ground searches impossible until spring. When the thaw finally came in May 2006, another search was mounted, focusing on areas that had been inaccessible during the winter. For 2 weeks, teams methodically covered new territory, but the results were the same. No clothing, no equipment, no signs of a camp or shelter, no human remains. It was as if Patrick and Vanessa Walsh had simply vanished into thin air. What would you do if someone you loved disappeared without a trace? How long would you keep searching? Sometimes the wilderness keeps its secrets for years, only revealing them when we've stopped looking. Stay with me to discover how a chance discovery 7 years later would blow this cold case wide open. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of tragedy, As months stretched into years, the disappearance of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh gradually faded from public consciousness. The media moved on to fresher mysteries, newer tragedies. The annual searches became smaller, more perfunctory, until they were little more than a notation on the park's calendar. For the families, however, time brought no such mercy. Eleanor Walsh converted Patrick's childhood bedroom into a meticulous archive of the case. Maps of Yosemite covered one wall, color-coded pins marking every search area, every potential lead. 3 filing cabinets contained copies of every report, every interview transcript, every theory proposed by investigators or psychics or amateur sleuths who reached out over the years. "I need to be ready," she explained to visitors who were unsettled by the room's transformation. "When they find something, and they will find something, I need to understand what it means immediately." Michael and Catherine Delaney coped differently. They established a scholarship fund in Vanessa's name at her alma mater, ensuring that her passion for environmental photography would live on through others. They visited Yosemite once a year, on the anniversary of the disappearance, hiking the first mile of the Cathedral Lakes Trail before leaving a small bouquet of wildflowers at the overlook where the boot prints had ended. The park itself seemed to absorb the mystery, adding it to its long history of human dramas played out against its ancient rocks and towering trees. Rangers would occasionally mention the case to new recruits as a sobering reminder of how quickly wilderness situations could turn deadly. "Even experienced hikers can make one mistake," they would say, and sometimes the park never gives them back. By the 7th anniversary in 2012, the case had grown so cold that when the annual review came up, it was handled by a new detective at the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch who had never even heard of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh. He read through the file with clinical detachment, noting the thoroughness of the original investigation and the complete lack of new leads. His conclusion, typed into the electronic case management system, was brief and devastating in its bureaucratic finality. "No new evidence. Recommend maintaining current status, unsolved, presumed deceased due to exposure or accidental fall." Annual review scheduled for October 2013. It was just 17 days after this review, on October 25, 2012, that Marcus Harding found himself wedged in a narrow chimney of rock, halfway up an isolated cliff face in Yosemite's less-traveled eastern section. At 36, Harding was an accomplished climber and wildlife photographer who specialized in capturing images of peregrine falcons in their natural habitat. He had spent 3 days tracking a nesting pair to this remote location, careful to maintain his distance while using his powerful telephoto lens to document their hunting behaviors. The climb to his current position had been technically challenging, a series of difficult moves up a crack system that few casual climbers would attempt. As he carefully adjusted his position to get a better angle for his shot, his elbow brushed against something wedged in a narrow crevice in the rock face. It wasn't the smooth stone he expected to feel, but something with texture and give. Curious, he glanced down. There, jammed about 8 inches into a horizontal crack, was what appeared to be the corner of a black case of some kind. It was weathered and dusty, clearly having been exposed to the elements for a considerable time. Harding, intrigued, carefully extracted one hand from his climbing hold and tugged gently at the object. It didn't budge. Setting his camera securely in his bag, he worked his fingers further into the crack and applied more pressure. With a sudden release, the object came free, sending a small shower of dust and pebbles cascading down the cliff face. In his hand was a battered black camera case. The leather was cracked and discolored, but the case was intact, its metal clasp still functional. Harding unsnapped it, and inside, protected from the worst of the elements, was a Nikon 35mm film camera. The camera itself showed signs of exposure, scratches on the body, the viewfinder glass slightly clouded, but it appeared remarkably preserved given its apparent time in the wilderness. Most surprising of all, the film advance lever indicated that the roll inside was only partially used. Harding secured the camera in his pack and completed his planned photographs of the falcons. It wasn't until he returned to his campsite that evening that he examined his find more carefully. The camera bore no obvious ownership markings, but there was something about it that felt significant, important somehow. The next morning, he hiked out to the nearest ranger station and turned in his discovery. "Found this wedged in a crack while I was climbing yesterday," he explained to the ranger on duty, placing the camera on the counter. "Thought someone might be missing it." The ranger, Mr. Morales, thanked him and took his contact information, promising to log the camera into the park's lost and found system. It was standard procedure, something she'd done hundreds of times with water bottles, sunglasses, and the occasional expensive piece of equipment left behind by distracted tourists. She placed the camera in a plastic evidence bag, labeled it with the date and location of discovery, and entered it into the computer system. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added a note. Camera appears to have been exposed to elements for extended period. Film possibly still inside. In the normal course of events, the camera would have remained in the lost and found for 60 days, after which it would have been processed as abandoned property. But Ranger Morales, finishing her shift that evening, happened to mention the unusual find to her supervisor. "Guy brought in an old film camera today," she said. "Found it wedged in a rock face out east. Must have been there for years." Her supervisor, David Chen, paused. "East section, near Cathedral?" "About 4 miles northeast of Lower Cathedral Lake, according to the climber." Chen frowned. Something tugged at his memory. "Hold on." He returned to his office and pulled up the active missing persons database for the park. Scrolling through the entries, he stopped at the file for Patrick and Vanessa Walsh. He skimmed the summary until he found what he was looking for, the list of personal effects believed to be with the couple when they disappeared. There it was, Nikon 35mm film camera, black with worn leather strap. Family heirloom belonging to Vanessa Walsh. Chen felt a chill run through him. He immediately called the park's lead investigator, Agent Raymond Torres. "I think we might have found Vanessa Walsh's camera," he said without preamble. "And there might be film still inside." Torres, who had inherited the Walsh case 2 years earlier, responded immediately. "Don't touch the film. I'm calling in a specialist." The camera was carefully transported to a forensic photography lab in Sacramento, where technician Sandra Liu was waiting. With over 20 years of experience recovering and developing damaged film, Liu was the foremost expert in extracting images from film exposed to extreme conditions. She worked in a darkroom, her movements slow and precise, as she extracted the roll from the camera. The film was brittle, affected by years of temperature fluctuations, but remarkably intact inside its protective canister. "We got lucky," Liu explained later. "The camera case provided initial protection, and the metal canister did the rest. The crack it was wedged in also shielded it from direct sunlight, which would have been fatal for the images." Using specialized chemicals and techniques, Liu carefully processed the fragile film. Of the 36 possible exposures on the roll, 24 had been used. As the images gradually appeared in the development trays, a story began to emerge: the final documented hours of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh. The first several photos were typical vacation snapshots. Patrick standing at the Yosemite Valley entrance sign, Vanessa capturing the morning light on Half Dome, both of them smiling for a selfie with El Capitan in the background. Then came a sequence taken on the morning of their hike, the silver Honda in the parking lot, Patrick organizing gear on the hood, a stunning landscape shot of the trail stretching ahead, morning mist still clinging to the distant trees. The images tracked their progress up the Cathedral Lakes Trail. Vanessa photographed wildflowers, a chattering squirrel, Patrick consulting his map at a trail junction. There was a beautiful shot of Lower Cathedral Lake, the water mirror still in the late morning light. Then came the photos from the overlook, where the boot prints had ended 7 years earlier. Patrick stood at the edge, gazing out at the panoramic view, unaware that he was being photographed, unaware that this moment would become evidence in the mystery of his own disappearance. The next image showed something unexpected: a narrow game trail leading away from the overlook, barely visible among the underbrush, but clearly marked by Patrick standing at its entrance, gesturing for Vanessa to follow. This trail had not been on any official map. It had not been part of their planned route. The subsequent photos documented their journey along this unmapped path. The terrain grew increasingly rugged. There were shots of unusual rock formations, a small hidden waterfall, Patrick helping Vanessa navigate a tricky scramble over fallen logs. Then came a series of 3 images that caused Agent Torres to inhale sharply when he first saw them. They showed a small cave entrance, partly concealed by vegetation, with Patrick standing beside it for scale. His expression was one of excitement and curiosity, the look of someone who has discovered something unexpected and intriguing. The next photo was taken from inside the cave looking out, the entrance a bright keyhole of light against the darkness. Patrick's silhouette was visible, halfway through the entrance, reaching back as if to help Vanessa inside. The final image on the roll was the most puzzling and would become the subject of intense debate among investigators. It appeared to be taken inside the cave, using the camera's flash. The photo was grainy and somewhat out of focus, but it clearly showed a stone wall that didn't look natural. It appeared to be constructed, with what seemed to be faint markings or symbols etched into its surface. And there the roll ended. Whatever Vanessa might have photographed next remained forever uncaptured. Agent Torres stared at the sequence of images spread before him, his mind racing. The photographs provided the first real breakthrough in the case in 7 years, but they also deepened the mystery considerably. "We need to find this cave," he said finally. "Everything depends on it." What would you do if you discovered a hidden cave while hiking? Would curiosity lead you inside, or would caution hold you back? For Patrick and Vanessa, that decision may have sealed their fate, but the most shocking revelation is still to come. The discovery of Vanessa Walsh's camera and the development of its final images sent a jolt of energy through the long-dormant investigation. The photos provided a vital new lead, a specific location to search, a potential explanation for why the couple had vanished so completely. Within 24 hours, Agent Torres had assembled a specialized team for what was now classified as a recovery operation rather than a search. The team included 2 NPS investigators with extensive cave experience, a forensic anthropologist from the FBI, a geologist specializing in Yosemite's rock formations, 4 experienced search and rescue personnel, Marcus Harding, the photographer who had found the camera. Harding's inclusion was practical. He knew exactly where he had discovered the camera and could guide them back to the location. From there, they hoped to reconstruct the couple's path based on the sequence of photographs. The families were notified of the development, but given only limited details. "We've found a significant piece of evidence that may help us understand what happened," Torres told them. "We'll know more in a few days." The team's first challenge was locating the exact spot where the boot prints had ended 7 years earlier. The landscape had changed, trees had fallen, new vegetation had grown, erosion had reshaped certain features. But using the photographs as reference points, they were able to identify the overlook. From there, they sought the game trail visible in Vanessa's photo. It was still there, though even more faint now, barely a depression in the forest floor. Without the photograph as a guide, no one would have recognized it as a path at all. "This explains why the original search teams missed it," Torres remarked. "It wouldn't have registered as a viable route." The team moved slowly along the forgotten trail, comparing their surroundings to the sequence of images. The rock formations, the small waterfall, the fallen logs. Each landmark brought them closer to the cave entrance that represented the last known location of Patrick and Vanessa Walsh. After 4 hours of careful navigation through increasingly difficult terrain, they reached a rocky slope that matched the background of the cave entrance photo. But there was a problem. No cave was visible. "It should be right here," Torres said, frustration evident in his voice as he held up the printed photograph, comparing it to the landscape before them. It was Harding who solved the puzzle. "Look at the vegetation pattern," he said, pointing to a dense thicket of brush that appeared unnatural in its uniformity. "That's not random growth." The team carefully cleared away the vegetation, revealing what appeared to be a deliberate screen of branches and brush placed over a narrow opening in the rock face. Someone had intentionally concealed the entrance. Torres ordered everyone to step back while he documented the scene. The hidden entrance raised immediate red flags. This was no longer just a matter of a couple who might have had an accident. This suggested intent, concealment, perhaps even foul play. After photographing the entrance, the team carefully removed the remaining camouflage. The opening was smaller than it had appeared in Vanessa's photograph, requiring the adults to crouch low to enter. Inside, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere in the darkness. The team proceeded with extreme caution, aware that they were entering a potentially unstable environment. The forensic anthropologist, Dr. Elaine Winters, took the lead, her experienced eyes scanning the ground for any signs of human remains. The first chamber of the cave was approximately 15 feet in diameter, with the ceiling just high enough for the taller team members to stand upright. Their powerful flashlights revealed smooth limestone walls glistening with moisture. "This is a dissolution cave," the geologist Dr. Hansen explained. "Formed by water dissolving the limestone over thousands of years. There are dozens of these scattered throughout the park, many unmapped." They found no immediate signs of the couple, but a narrow passage at the back of the chamber led deeper into the cave system. As they proceeded, the passage widened into a second, larger chamber. Here they found the first evidence that Patrick and Vanessa had indeed entered the cave. On a small natural shelf in the rock wall sat a red Swiss Army knife, identical to the one Eleanor Walsh had described as her son's treasured possession from his father. Beside it was a small LED headlamp, its batteries long dead. The items appeared to have been deliberately placed, not dropped. It was as if Patrick had left them there intentionally, perhaps as a marker or while preparing for something. "They were here," Torres said quietly, bagging the items as evidence. "This confirms it." The team continued deeper into the cave system, which proved to be more extensive than initially assumed. The main passage branched into several smaller tunnels, creating a natural maze that would be easy to get lost in, without proper equipment and experience. In the third chamber, approximately 200 feet from the entrance, they found what appeared to be the remains of a small camp. A faded backpack leaned against one wall. A space blanket was spread on the relatively dry ground. Empty water bottles and energy bar wrappers suggested someone had spent at least a day or two in this location. But still there were no human remains. "This doesn't make sense," Torres muttered. "If they got lost in here or injured, we should have found them by now." It was Dr. Winters who noticed the anomaly on the far wall of the chamber. "There," she said, pointing her light at what appeared to be a flat stone surface. "That's not natural." The team approached the wall and immediately recognized it as the one from Vanessa's final photograph. Up close, it was clear that this was not a natural formation. The stone had been carefully arranged to create a flat vertical surface approximately 8 feet high and 10 feet wide. And etched into its surface were unmistakable symbols, geometric patterns, spirals, and what appeared to be stylized animal figures. "This is a petroglyph panel," Dr. Hansen whispered, his voice tinged with awe. "Native American rock art. And judging by the style, it's very old, possibly Miwok, maybe 1,000 years or more." But what caught Torres' attention wasn't the ancient markings, but something more recent. At the center of the panel, someone had carefully arranged small stones in a distinctive pattern, an arrow pointing to the base of the wall. "Help me move these," Torres directed, and 2 team members carefully shifted the loose rocks at the bottom of the panel, revealing a small opening, a crawl space leading even deeper into the cave system. The opening was tight, requiring them to proceed on hands and knees. After about 15 feet, it opened into a chamber unlike any they had seen before. This space was perfectly circular, about 20 feet in diameter, with a domed ceiling from which a single shaft of sunlight penetrated through a natural chimney above. The light illuminated the center of the chamber, where a stone altar-like structure stood, and on that altar, carefully arranged, were 2 items that brought the team to a stunned silence: a woman's leather-bound journal and an ultrasound image. Torres approached slowly, his heart pounding. The journal's cover was weather-stained but intact. He opened it carefully to find handwriting he would later confirm was Vanessa Walsh's. The first entry was dated October 8, 2005, the day the couple disappeared. The chamber contained other items as well: a collection of carefully arranged stones, bundles of what appeared to be dried plants, and small carved wooden figures of uncertain origin or purpose. What it did not contain were any human remains. Torres read the first page of the journal, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief. "We need to get all of this back to the lab immediately," he said, carefully placing the journal in an evidence bag. "And no one, absolutely no one, discusses what we found here until I've had a chance to review everything." The team methodically documented and collected every item in the chamber, working in near silence, each person struggling to make sense of the scene. The cave had provided answers, yes, but they were answers that defied conventional explanation. As they finally emerged from the cave entrance into the fading afternoon light, Torres pulled Harding aside. "The camera you found," he said quietly. "Was there anything unusual about where it was wedged in the rock?" Harding considered the question. "It seemed deliberately placed," he replied after a moment. "Not dropped or lost. The way it was positioned in that crack, someone would have had to push it in there intentionally." Torres nodded, as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "One more thing," he added. "When exactly did you find it?" "The precise date." "October 8th, Harding replied. "I remember because it was my birthday." Torres stared at him. "October 8th, 2012? "Yes. 7 years to the day after they disappeared," Torres murmured, more to himself than to Harding. The coincidence, if it was a coincidence, was the final unsettling piece in a puzzle that had just become infinitely more complex. When the investigation team returned to park headquarters, Torres immediately sequestered himself with the evidence, particularly Vanessa's journal. For 3 days, he read and reread its contents, consulting with experts in various fields, including anthropologists, religious scholars, and psychiatrists.